Sarah Williams had always believed in helping others, even when times were tough for her own family. Living in a small house on the outskirts of Detroit, she worked 2 jobs to support her elderly mother and teenage son Marcus. The neighborhood wasn't the safest, but Sarah had made it her mission to be a light in the darkness for anyone who needed it. On that cold February evening, the snow was falling harder than the weather forecast had predicted. Sarah was finishing her shift at the local diner when she noticed a man sitting on the bench outside the bus station across the street. He looked completely soaked and was shivering uncontrollably. His clothes were torn and he appeared to have nowhere to go. Most people walked past him without a second glance, but Sarah couldn't ignore someone in such obvious distress. She approached the man carefully, noticing he was probably in his 50s with weathered hands and tired eyes. When she asked if he needed help, he looked up with surprise, as if no one had spoken to him kindly in a very long time. The stranger introduced himself as Robert, explaining that he had been traveling for days trying to get back home to his family after losing his job. His wallet had been stolen at a truck stop, leaving him with no money, no identification, and no way to contact anyone. He had been sleeping rough for 3 nights, and the approaching storm meant he might not survive another night outdoors. Sarah felt her heart break for this man who reminded her of her own father, who had passed away 5 years earlier. Despite her modest means and the fact that she barely knew this person, she made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She invited Robert to spend the night at her home, offering him a warm meal and a safe place to sleep until the storm passed. Robert was overwhelmed by her kindness and initially refused, not wanting to impose on a stranger. But Sarah insisted, explaining that her faith taught her to help those in need, and she couldn't live with herself knowing someone was suffering when she had the power to help. She assured him that her son Marcus was strong and her mother was wise, so they would all be safe together. As they walked through the snowy streets to Sarah's house, Robert shared more of his story. He had worked as a mechanic for 20 years before the shop closed down, leaving him unemployed and eventually homeless. He had been trying to reach his sister in another state, but without any means of communication or transportation, the journey had become impossible. Sarah listened with compassion, sharing her own struggles as a single mother working multiple jobs to make ends meet. She explained how her community had always looked out for each other, and how small acts of kindness had helped her family through their darkest times. This philosophy of giving even when you don't have much had been passed down from her grandmother, who had helped countless people during the Great Depression. When they reached Sarah's modest home, she introduced Robert to her family. Her mother, Dorothy, welcomed him with the same warmth that Sarah had shown, immediately setting about preparing hot soup and coffee. Marcus, though initially cautious, soon warmed up to Robert when he learned about his mechanical skills and offered to help fix their old car that had been giving them trouble. That evening, as Robert sat at their dinner table sharing stories and expressing his gratitude, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had no idea that this simple act of compassion would soon bring an unexpected turn of events that would test everything she believed about trust, community, and the power of doing what's right. The warmth of that night with Robert safe and fed would soon be followed by a morning that none of them could have predicted. The next morning, Sarah woke up to the sound of multiple motorcycle engines rumbling outside her house. At first, she thought it might be the neighbors, but the noise was too loud and seemed to be getting closer. When she looked out her bedroom window, her heart nearly stopped. At least 15 motorcycles were parked in front of her house, with more arriving by the minute. The riders were all wearing black leather jackets with patches and insignia she didn't recognize. They looked intimidating, with their heavy boots, bandanas, and serious expressions. Sarah's first instinct was to call the police, thinking these bikers might be there to cause trouble, or perhaps looking for someone in the neighborhood. Robert had already woken up and was sitting in the living room when Sarah came downstairs. The moment he heard the motorcycles, his entire demeanor changed. Instead of looking worried or frightened like Sarah expected, Robert's face lit up with joy and relief. He rushed to the window and began waving at the bikers outside. Sarah was completely confused and slightly alarmed. She wondered if Robert had lied to her about his situation, or if he was involved with some kind of dangerous group. Her protective instincts kicked in as she thought about her mother and son, and she began to question whether she had made a terrible mistake by bringing this stranger into their home. Robert noticed Sarah's concern and quickly explained that these weren't just any bikers, they were his family. He revealed that he was a member of a motorcycle club called the Iron Brotherhood, a group dedicated to helping veterans and their families. The club had been searching for him ever since he disappeared 3 weeks ago, following multiple leads and checking every shelter and hospital in the region. As Robert continued his explanation, Sarah learned that he was actually Robert Tank Morrison, a decorated Army veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan. After returning from his final deployment, he had struggled with adjusting to civilian life and had eventually found community and purpose with the Iron Brotherhood. The motorcycle club wasn't a gang as Sarah had initially feared, but rather a support network for veterans dealing with various challenges. The reason Robert had been traveling alone was because he had been visiting his daughter in another state, trying to rebuild their relationship after years of being distant due to his struggles with trauma. On his way back home, his motorcycle had broken down, and a series of unfortunate events had left him stranded and robbed. He had been too proud and ashamed to contact his club brothers for help, choosing instead to try to make it home on his own. Meanwhile, the Iron Brotherhood had been frantically searching for their missing member. When Robert didn't return as expected and didn't respond to any calls, they organized search teams and had been riding day and night looking for him. They had traced his last known location and had been systematically checking every town and city along his planned route home. The club's president, a man called Big Mike, was the first to approach Sarah's door. Instead of the threatening figure she had imagined, he was polite and respectful, removing his helmet and explaining the situation calmly. He thanked Sarah profusely for taking care of their brother and assured her that they meant no harm to her or her family. As more club members gathered around, Sarah began to see a different side of these intimidating-looking bikers. They were genuinely relieved to find Robert safe and were incredibly grateful to Sarah for her kindness. Several of them had tears in their eyes as they hugged Robert, clearly showing how much they cared about their missing brother. Sarah realized that her initial judgment had been wrong. These weren't dangerous criminals, but rather a tight-knit family of men who looked out for each other. The patches on their jackets told stories of military service, charity rides, and community involvement. She began to understand that sometimes the most unlikely people can surprise you with their goodness and loyalty. As the initial shock wore off, Sarah found herself in the middle of an extraordinary reunion. The bikers, despite their rough appearance, were incredibly respectful of her property and her family. They kept their voices down, aware that they were in a residential neighborhood, and several of them apologized for the early morning disturbance. Big Mike, the club president, was a towering man with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to see right through people. He explained to Sarah that the Iron Brotherhood wasn't just a motorcycle club, but an organization founded by Vietnam veterans to help fellow soldiers transition back to civilian life. They organized charity rides, helped homeless veterans find housing, and provided support networks for those struggling with depression and other challenges. Robert's story became clearer as his club brothers shared their perspective. He had been one of their most dedicated members, always the first to volunteer for charity events and support rides. When younger veterans joined the club feeling lost and hopeless, Robert was often the one who took them under his wing and helped them find purpose again. The reason Robert had been too ashamed to call for help was because he had been the strong one for so long. As someone who had helped others through their darkest moments, he found it difficult to admit that he needed assistance himself. His pride had nearly cost him his life, and the relief on his face as he reunited with his brothers was unmistakable. Sarah's mother, Dorothy, came outside to see what was happening, and instead of being frightened by the crowd of bikers, she was fascinated by their stories. Several of the men were her age and had served in Vietnam, and she found herself deep in conversation with them about their experiences and the challenges they had faced coming home from war. Marcus, Sarah's teenage son, was initially intimidated, but quickly became fascinated by the motorcycles and the stories the bikers shared. One of the younger members, a man called Wheels, who was only a few years older than Marcus, began explaining how the club had helped him turn his life around after he returned from Iraq with severe injuries. As the morning progressed, Sarah learned more about the individual members of the Iron Brotherhood. There was Doc, a former Navy medic who now worked as a paramedic and organized first aid training for the community. There was Preacher, an ordained minister who conducted funeral services for veterans who had no family. And there was Patch, a former Marine who had lost his leg in combat but had become an advocate for disabled veterans' rights. Each man had a story of struggle, recovery, and finding purpose through helping others. Sarah realized that what she was witnessing was not just a motorcycle club, but a family of men who had found healing through service and brotherhood. Their intimidating appearance was just a protective shell around hearts that had been broken by war and mended through community. The bikers were amazed by Sarah's kindness in taking in Robert when he was at his lowest point. Big Mike explained that they had encountered many people during their search who had been afraid or unwilling to help, but Sarah had risked her own safety to help a stranger in need. Her actions exemplified the values that the Iron Brotherhood tried to live by every day. As they prepared to take Robert home, the bikers asked Sarah if there was anything they could do to repay her kindness. She insisted that no payment was necessary, that helping Robert had been reward enough. But the club members were not the type of men to let a good deed go unreturned, and they began discussing among themselves how they might show their appreciation. Robert pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation, thanking her again for saving his life. He explained that he had been at the end of his rope that night, feeling like a burden to everyone around him. Her simple act of kindness had reminded him that there were still good people in the world, and that his life had value. He promised that he would never forget what she had done, and that he would find a way to pay it forward. Before the Iron Brotherhood prepared to leave, Big Mike approached Sarah with a serious expression. He explained that their club had a tradition of honoring civilians who went above and beyond to help veterans in need. Sarah's actions weren't just kind, they were life-saving, and the club wanted to recognize her in a meaningful way. The bikers had noticed several things about Sarah's house that needed attention. The front steps were cracked and dangerous, especially in winter weather. The old car in the driveway clearly needed repairs, and Marcus had mentioned that they couldn't afford to fix it. The roof had missing shingles, and the windows needed new weather stripping to keep the cold out. Big Mike explained that many of the club members worked in construction, automotive repair, and other trades. They had decided that they wanted to help Sarah's family by doing the repairs and improvements that she couldn't afford on her own. It wasn't charity, he emphasized, but a way of honoring someone who had honored them by caring for their brother. Sarah was overwhelmed by the offer and initially tried to refuse, feeling that she had only done what any decent person would do, but the bikers were insistent, explaining that helping others was part of their code, and they would actually be insulted if she didn't let them repay her kindness. Dorothy convinced her daughter to accept, pointing out that pride shouldn't prevent her from accepting help when it was offered with genuine gratitude. Over the next few weeks, the Iron Brotherhood became a regular presence in Sarah's neighborhood. They arrived every weekend, turning her house into a bustling construction site. Neighbors who had initially been suspicious of the bikers began to see the positive impact they were making, not just on Sarah's property but on the entire community. Doc and several other members repaired the roof, replacing missing shingles and fixing leaks that had been causing problems for years. Wheels and his team completely rebuilt the front steps, making them safe and attractive. Patch, despite his disability, supervised the installation of new windows and doors that would significantly reduce Sarah's heating bills. The transformation of Sarah's house became a neighborhood event. Other residents began offering drinks and snacks to the working bikers, and several people mentioned repairs and improvements they needed but couldn't afford. The Iron Brotherhood, true to their mission of community service, began taking note of these needs and planning additional projects. Marcus found himself learning valuable skills as he worked alongside the bikers. Wheels taught him basic automotive repair while they rebuilt the engine of the family car. Doc showed him electrical work and plumbing basics. These men, who had no biological children of their own in many cases, enjoyed mentoring the young man and sharing their knowledge. Sarah was amazed by the transformation not just of her house, but of her entire community. The bikers' presence had brought neighbors together in ways that hadn't happened in years. People were talking to each other, sharing resources, and looking out for one another. The fear and suspicion that had divided the neighborhood began to dissolve as residents saw the genuine goodness of these rough-looking men. Robert visited frequently during the renovation work, His health and spirits clearly improved now that he was back with his support network. He had reconnected with his daughter and was receiving counseling through veteran services that the club had helped him access. Sarah was proud to see how much stronger and more confident he had become. The local news eventually caught wind of the story, wanting to do a feature about the motorcycle club that was renovating a house for a Good Samaritan. Sarah was reluctant to be interviewed, preferring to keep the focus on the positive work the Iron Brotherhood was doing in the community. But Big Mike convinced her that sharing their story might encourage other people to help veterans in need. As the renovation neared completion, Sarah realized that what had started as one night of shelter for a stranger had blossomed into something much larger. The Iron Brotherhood had become an extended family, and her act of kindness had created ripple effects throughout the entire community. She began to understand that sometimes the smallest gestures can lead to the most profound changes. 3 months after that snowy February night, Sarah's life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The house renovation was complete, transforming her modest home into something beautiful and energy efficient. But the real transformation had been in the relationships and community connections that had grown from that one act of kindness. The Iron Brotherhood had officially adopted Sarah's neighborhood as one of their community service areas. They organized monthly cleanup days, helped elderly residents with yard work and home repairs, and established a food pantry in the community center. What had started as gratitude toward one woman had evolved into a comprehensive support system for the entire area. Sarah found herself becoming an unofficial liaison between the motorcycle club and the community. Her natural leadership skills and her ability to bridge different groups made her invaluable in organizing projects and resolving conflicts. The bikers trusted her judgment and the neighbors respected her voice, making her the perfect person to coordinate ongoing initiatives. Marcus had thrived under the mentorship of the Iron Brotherhood members. His grades improved as he gained confidence and direction, and he began talking about pursuing a career in automotive engineering. Several club members had offered to help him apply for scholarships and had connected him with trade schools and community colleges that offered programs in his areas of interest. Dorothy, Sarah's mother, had become something of a den mother to the younger veterans in the club. Her wisdom and maternal instincts provided comfort to men who were struggling with loneliness and family estrangement. She organized regular dinners where club members could enjoy home-cooked meals and companionship, filling a void that many of them had carried for years. The media attention had brought unexpected opportunities. A local foundation, inspired by the story, had established a grant program to support community partnerships between veteran organizations and neighborhood groups. Sarah found herself invited to speak at conferences and community events about the power of grassroots cooperation and mutual aid. Robert had become one of Sarah's closest friends, stopping by regularly to check on the family and help with various projects. His experience of hitting rock bottom and being rescued by kindness had given him a new perspective on life and a renewed sense of purpose. He had begun working with homeless veterans, using his own story to reach men who had given up hope. The Iron Brotherhood's presence in the neighborhood had also attracted other community organizations. Local churches began partnering with the club on charitable projects. The area school district started a mentorship program, pairing at-risk youth with veteran volunteers. Small businesses began offering discounts and job opportunities to club members and the families they supported. Sarah's co-workers at the diner were amazed by the changes in her life and her community. What had once been a struggling neighborhood with high crime rates and little community cohesion had become a model of cooperation and mutual support. Property values were rising, and new families were moving in, attracted by the sense of safety and community that had developed. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some longtime residents were initially resistant to change, suspicious of the bikers' motives or uncomfortable with the increased activity in the neighborhood. Sarah spent considerable time listening to concerns and helping people understand that the changes were positive and permanent, not just a temporary publicity stunt. There were also practical challenges in coordinating so many different personalities and organizations. The Iron Brotherhood operated with military efficiency, while community groups often worked more slowly and democratically. Sarah learned to navigate these differences, helping each group appreciate the other's strengths and work styles. As winter approached again, Sarah often reflected on how much had changed since that snowy night when she decided to help a stranger The physical improvements to her house were obvious, but the deeper changes in her community and her own sense of purpose were even more significant. She had discovered that kindness wasn't just about individual acts, but about creating systems and relationships that could sustain and multiply compassion over time. The Iron Brotherhood had taught her that strength and gentleness could coexist, that people who looked intimidating could have the biggest hearts, and that real families were built through shared values and mutual support, rather than just blood relationships. These lessons had changed not just her own life, but had rippled out to touch hundreds of other lives in positive ways. 1 year after that fateful snowy night, Sarah stood in her transformed front yard watching the Iron Brotherhood organize their annual charity ride. Dozens of motorcycles filled the street, their riders preparing for a journey that would raise money for homeless veterans across the state. The same neighborhood that had once been suspicious of these leather-clad men now cheered them on as local heroes. The charity ride had become the largest in the region, drawing participants from motorcycle clubs across 3 states. But what made it special wasn't just its size, it was the story behind it. Sarah's simple act of kindness had grown into a movement that had helped hundreds of veterans find housing, employment, and community support. Robert stood beside his rebuilt motorcycle, wearing his Iron Brotherhood colors with pride. The transformation in him was remarkable, from the broken, desperate man who had sat shivering on a bus stop bench to a confident advocate who now ran the club's veteran outreach program. He had found his daughter again, rebuilt their relationship, and had even started dating a nurse who worked at the Veterans Hospital. Marcus had just received his acceptance letter to a technical college where he would study automotive engineering on a full scholarship, funded by a coalition of veteran organizations and local businesses. The mentorship he had received from the Iron Brotherhood had not only improved his academic performance, but had taught him valuable life skills and given him positive male role models who believed in his potential. Dorothy had become the official historian of the Iron Brotherhood's community service projects, documenting their impact and helping them apply for grants and recognition. Her basement had been converted into an archive of photos, testimonials, and records that told the story of how a motorcycle club had transformed from a support group into a community development organization. The ripple effects of that one night continued to spread in unexpected ways. The story had inspired similar partnerships in other cities, with veteran organizations and community groups working together to address local problems. Sarah regularly received emails from people across the country who had heard her story and were starting their own initiatives. The local government had taken notice of the positive changes in Sarah's neighborhood and had designated it as a model community development zone. Additional funding had been allocated for infrastructure improvements, after-school programs, and small business development. What had once been a neglected area was now a showcase of what was possible when different groups worked together toward common goals. Sarah had been offered several job opportunities as a result of her community leadership, including positions with nonprofit organizations and government agencies. But she had chosen to stay at the diner and in her neighborhood, understanding that real change happened through consistent, everyday actions rather than grand gestures or prestigious positions. The Iron Brotherhood had grown significantly, with new chapters forming in neighboring cities inspired by the success of their community outreach model. But they had maintained their focus on quality over quantity, ensuring that each new member understood that wearing their colors meant a commitment to service and brotherhood that extended far beyond motorcycle riding. As Sarah watched the charity ride begin, she thought about all the lives that had been touched by that one decision to help a stranger in need. Children in the neighborhood now had safe places to play and positive role models to look up to. Elderly residents had support systems that helped them age in place with dignity. Young people had mentors and opportunities that would shape their futures. The most profound change, however, was in Sarah herself. She had discovered that she had natural leadership abilities and a talent for bringing different groups together around shared goals. More importantly, she had learned that individual acts of kindness, when combined with sustained commitment and community support, could create lasting change that benefited everyone involved. As the last motorcycle disappeared around the corner, Sarah reflected on the lesson that had emerged from her experience. Kindness wasn't just about helping people in crisis. It was about building relationships and systems that prevented crises from happening in the first place. The Iron Brotherhood had taught her that true strength came from lifting others up, and that the most unlikely friendships could become the foundation for extraordinary communities. The story that had begun with a cold stranger and a warm meal had become a testament to the power of human connection and the possibility of transformation when people choose love over fear, community over isolation, and action over indifference. Sarah's one night of hospitality had grown into a legacy that would continue to impact lives for generations to come.